Time now for a check of the top business news stories. Our business editor, Kate Moody's here. Hi there, Kate.
Hi, Tom.
Let's begin by taking a look at the energy industry. Quite a lot of changes on the horizon.
Yeah, and in particular for oil giants. In the past 24 hours alone, a Dutch court ordered Shell to slash its greenhouse gas emissions by nearly half by the end of 2030. On the same day, nearly two-thirds of investors at the U.S. oil firm Chevron backed a proposal calling for it to reduce its carbon emissions. And shareholders at ExxonMobil voted two climate activists onto the board in a move that could force change from the top. The two new board members there were nominated by the activist group Engine Number One. Both of them have pledged more aggressive action on climate change. Oil companies around the world have been adapting to new environmental targets. Engine Number One said its new directors have experience in successful and profitable energy transformation. They can help turn aspirations of addressing the risks of climate change into a long-term plan, but not talking points. Certainly hoping that election will accelerate some change at ExxonMobil. While that's all happening in the industry itself, governments are also trying to speed up the transition to greener energy. The United States has this week approved a new wind power project, part of Joe Biden's efforts to catch up to Europe. Ellen Gainsford reports.
As part of his green agenda, Joe Biden wants to double the energy from offshore wind turbines in the US by 2030. It's a game of catch-up for the country, which is behind China and the EU for its wind capacity, while the UK is home to the world's largest wind farms.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones.
As part of this plan, US authorities this week opened up California's Pacific coast to wind farms. So far, 2 sites have been identified. Together, they could support enough clean energy production to power around 1.6 million homes. The scheme follows on the heels of another big project in Massachusetts. As wind power is still developing as an industry in the US, for now, the project will rely on technology from other countries.
Bearing in mind that the industry is only just starting off in the US, so what we're having to do for this first project is still manufacture a lot of the components in other places. So what we would be doing, for example, with the blades, which will be more than 100 meters long, each blade, is we will be manufacturing them in France.
While Joe Biden has promised thousands of jobs from wind power, analysts say that initially, most of the manufacturing positions stemming from the US offshore wind industry will be in Europe, with suppliers biding their time before taking the plunge and investing in US manufacturing.
The U.S. economy and labor market continue to recover from the worst of the pandemic. The Commerce Department has confirmed its initial estimate that GDP grew 6.4% in the first 3 months of this year compared to the same period a year earlier. Most forecasts suggest that it will pick up steam in the second quarter, around 8% GDP growth is forecast. The number of new unemployment claims, meanwhile, has continued to drop. Just over 400,000 new applications for jobless benefits were filed across the United States last week. That's the lowest level since before the pandemic hit, although it's still nearly double the pre-pandemic average. A number of states are set to phase out the more generous unemployment benefits that the latest stimulus bill extended through September. At least 23 states have announced they will end those federal benefits early, some of them in the coming weeks. Trade representatives from the United States and China have held talks described by Beijing as the first candid exchange since Joe Biden took office in January. The U.S. trade negotiator Katherine Tai spoke to her counterpart Liu He via video link on Thursday. She says she's analyzing whether China is respecting the terms of a Phase 1 deal, which was signed at the beginning of 2020 under Donald Trump. Earlier in his administration, the world's 2 largest economies imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of each other's goods. Many of them remain in place. An initial face-to-face meeting between the Biden administration and Chinese officials in Alaska in March broke down. Moving on to some of the day's other business headlines now. Airbus shares have soared 9% in Paris as the plane maker said it would ramp up production. It said it sees a recovery to pre-pandemic levels of demand for its aircraft by 2025. The aviation giant said it would increase output of its A320neo by more than 10% by the end of this year. U.S. rival Boeing, meanwhile, will pay a $17 million settlement over production problems with its 737 aircraft models. The complaints by the Federal Aviation Administration predate Boeing's MAX safety scandal. Despite the penalty, Boeing shares were up around 4% on hopes of a recovery for the sector. The French government has announced more help for businesses due to COVID-19. 15 billion euros more will go to shore up existing government schemes, which have been supporting companies and workers over the past year. Shirley Sitbon has more.
When COVID-19 first hit France and the first lockdown was imposed, the government took a series of measures to support businesses and avert job cuts. Despite the massive bill, the president promised to continue the policy no matter the cost. Now the French government is extending its aid package again as the economy reopens after a third lockdown and the support is being scaled back.
Nous sommes arrivés à ce moment de la sortie du quoi qu'il en coûte, mais nous le faisons progressivement. Un restaurant qui rouvre, il faut qu'il puisse embaucher, donc on maintient le paiement d'une partie des charges pour l'État. Il faut qu'il fasse des achats de fournitures, donc on maintient le fonds de solidarité. On sait qu'il va ouvrir avec des jauges qui vont être plus réduites, il va ouvrir d'abord qu'en terrasse, donc on prend en compte cette perte de chiffre d'affaires.
In the revised budget plan, the state will inject another 15 billion euros in financial support, including tax breaks for businesses, grants from the Solidarity Fund for companies forced to close, and a top-up for the furlough scheme, which has paid workers' salaries. The finance minister says the government will decide at the end of August whether some of those measures should be maintained. Bruno Le Maire says almost 100 billion euros spent so far have allowed France's economy to restart quickly, and economic growth is expected to exceed 5% this year.
Ireland's finance minister has told France 24 he believes agreement will be found at an international level on how to tax multinational companies, but that small countries like Ireland must be allowed to compete on the rate of tax. This after France and Germany's finance ministers said they would be pushing for agreement on a global minimum tax at a proposal of around 15% at a G7 meeting next week. Pascal Donoghue has been speaking to France 24's Catherine Nicholson. Take a listen.
Over the last number of years, many things that had been a part of our tax policy and corporate tax policy for previous decades, we have removed that and we've changed it. Change is coming, and when that change comes, it will affect our corporate tax revenue. But on the other hand, we're no longer a country in which tax policy equals our entire economic model. We're well beyond that point. Other things about our place within the European Union, our education system, our labour market, our investment in infrastructure, those things play a huge part in our competitiveness too, and will continue to matter in the future.
That full interview on our website.
Thank you very much, Kate Moody.